could have imagined that the woman once known as the Hollywood doll of the 1960 seconds would become the anti-war icon who shook America? Jane Fonda, daughter of legendary actor Henry Fonda, was not only a gifted actress with 2 Academy Awards, but also a figure who lived for decades on the razor's edge between love and hate in the public eye. Behind the spotlight and the sensual photos that once captivated millions of men lay a shadowed world of family tragedies that left her burdened with guilt for a lifetime. Yet, it's the private photos and the untold story that will finally reveal who Jane truly is. Stay until the end of the video to uncover the part of her life that was never made public. Jane Seymour Fonda was born on December 21st, 1937 inches, New York City, into a family where art and tragedy seemed to walk hand in hand. Her father, Henry Fonda, was one of the most respected actors in Hollywood at the time, while her mother, Frances Ford Seymour Fonda, was a beautiful woman from the Canadian upper class. When Jane was only 12, her mother was diagnosed with a mental illness and admitted to a hospital for treatment. She never came home. Frances took her own life in despair, leaving behind a wound that would never truly heal in her young daughter's heart. Jane later said, "I spent my whole life trying to understand why my mother left, but maybe I'll never really know." Her father, Henry, buried his pain in silence. He remarried soon after, but that marriage too fell apart within a few years. From a young age, Jane dreamed of becoming a model, a seemingly safe path that suited her natural elegance and poise. Thanks to her father's reputation, she easily graced the covers of prestigious magazines like Vogue. Yet, even amid early success, Jane felt an emptiness inside, a quiet calling she couldn't yet name. The turning point came when she met Lee Strasberg, founder of the legendary actors studio, cradle of many Hollywood icons. He told her, "You have talent, Jane." A simple sentence, but one that changed her life forever. Jane once recalled, "When he said that, something inside me woke up. For the first time in my life, I felt I could actually do something meaningful." From that moment on, the dream of acting ignited within her, fierce and unstoppable. Leaving Vassar College before graduating, Jane plunged into the world of theater. Her debut in the romantic comedy Tall Story, 1960, marked her first steps on Broadway. Just 2 years later, she made her film debut and quickly drew attention with Walk on the Wild Side, earning her first Golden Globe Award. But the glory didn't last long. The following year, the Harvard Lampoon mockingly named her Worst Actress of the Year for her failed role in The Chapman Report. Yet, instead of breaking down, Jane chose to push forward. 3 years later, in 1965, she achieved a major breakthrough with Cat Ballou, one of that year's biggest box office hits. By 1968, Barbarella had turned Jane Fonda into a global sex symbol. In the years that followed, her career soared, crowned with a string of prestigious awards. In HBO's documentary Jane Fonda in 5 Acts, she revisited the scars of her childhood. Her mother, Frances Ford Seymour, suffered from bipolar disorder, something Jane only discovered after her mother's death. "I tried to understand her," Jane said with tearful eyes, "but I never really knew who she was." That cruel truth became a wound that never healed, a shadow that followed her for years. Though she rarely spoke of it, the guilt seeped into every performance, every speech, and every courageous decision she made throughout her life. Her mother's death was a haunting tragedy. Frances took her own life with a razor blade while in a mental institution, an image so horrific that people still shudder when they hear it. Jane's father, legendary actor Henry Fonda, told his children their mother had died of a heart attack. For years, Jane believed the story until she stumbled upon an article in a film magazine revealing the truth. "That moment," she said, "was like a knife cutting through my childhood." From that day on, her world collapsed. In her memoir, My Life So Far, Jane wrote that learning the truth about her mother's death wasn't just a search for facts, it was a journey toward her own liberation. "I always thought I had forgiven her, that I had moved on, but the truth is, I never really had." Writing about the past became her way of speaking to her old wounds to prove to herself that she was not the reason her mother chose to die. In an interview with People, Jane admitted that she once resented her parents for not loving her the way she needed. But through years of reflection, she came to understand it wasn't that I was unlovable, they just had their own struggles. And when you finally see that, you find compassion and you can forgive. That understanding gave Jane the strength to reconcile with the father, who had remained emotionally distant for most of her life. To bridge that gap, Jane purchased the rights to the play on Golden Pond and turned it into a film just so she could act alongside her father. The project became not only a critical and commercial success, but also an emotional reunion between two wounded souls who finally found each other through art. Both father and daughter were nominated for Oscars, a historic milestone never before achieved by a Hollywood parent-child duo. Shortly after the film's release, Henry Fonda passed away. Jane later shared that in his final moments, she held his hand and whispered, "I want to be your friend." It was the first and the last time she had ever said those words. No scripts, no cameras, just two souls once divided by pain, now united in one tearful touch. But Jane Fonda's life was never peaceful. Behind the glamour, she remained a lonely woman, still wrestling with emotional scars. In a 2017 interview with Entertainment Weekly, when asked, "What have you learned about love after all these years?" Jane, then 80, gave a bittersweet smile. "Nothing. I wasn't born for love." A year later, she told Extra, "I don't date anymore. I had someone a few years ago, but now I've closed up shop." In her memoir, Jane wrote candidly about her youth, her passions, her mistakes, and her many romantic adventures. Her first love, actor James Franciscus, when she was 18, was the first time she experienced what it meant to feel truly grown both emotionally and physically. After that, Jane's list of lovers grew long, reflecting a woman torn between a deep hunger to be loved and an equally deep fear of love itself. In 1963, she met French director Roger Vadim, the man who had created the iconic image of Brigitte Bardot. They married in 1965 and had a daughter, Vanessa Vadim. But their marriage couldn't withstand the tides of change. As Jane became more involved in social movements and anti-war activism, their love gradually faded. By 1972, they quietly parted ways. Just 3 days after their legal divorce, Jane shocked the public by marrying political activist Tom Hayden while 3 months pregnant. Their marriage lasted nearly 2 decades, during which they had a son, Troy Garrity, and adopted an African-American daughter, Mary Luana Williams. But once again, Jane found herself watching another family fall apart. In 1990, they officially divorced, marking yet another chapter of heartbreak in a life that seemed destined to be anything but simple. After her tumultuous marriage to Tom Hayden, Jane met Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, a billionaire known for his free-spirited and unpredictable nature. Jane once said that Turner made her laugh and cry every day because he was the kind of man who was both irresistibly charming and endlessly challenging. They married in 1991 and stayed together for nearly a decade. But when Jane realized she had spent too long living in someone else's orbit, she decided to leave. It was her last marriage. After Turner, Jane entered a gentler relationship with music producer Richard Perry. They lived together for several years, sharing a love for art and creativity, but their relationship ended in 2017. Looking back, Jane admitted that every romance in her life stemmed from the same root: the need to be loved, to be seen, to fill the void left by her mother's death. On screen, Jane Fonda embodied the image of a strong woman, bold, alluring, and intelligent. But behind the spotlight, she was a fragile soul battling insecurity and addiction for many years. "It's a miracle that I'm still alive and working at 80, she once said, her voice tinged with both gratitude and melancholy. Growing up without a mother, Jane was raised by her father, the legendary actor Henry Fonda. Yet his lessons, instead of comforting her, often felt like chains. "A lady must be perfect in every way," he used to say. It wasn't until years later in a conversation with Oprah Winfrey that Jane confessed, "It took me a long time to realize we're not meant to be perfect, we're meant to be whole." That realization to her was liberation, a way to finally forgive herself after a lifetime of pressure and pretense. Throughout her youth, Jane lived 2 lives, one for the public and one in the shadows. Outwardly, she was the ideal woman, a movie star, an activist, a role model, but inside, she was someone afraid to look in the mirror. It wasn't until middle age that Jane finally found the courage to remove that mask. Yet, just as her spirit began to find peace, her body betrayed her. Illness struck as if fate were testing her one last time. In the late 2000s, Jane was diagnosed with breast cancer and osteoporosis. She underwent a mastectomy and recovered quickly. But the following year, doctors found another malignant tumor on her lip. Not long after, in 2022, came more devastating news: non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of blood cancer. After months of chemotherapy, Jane announced that her cancer had gone into remission. She later reflected that her rebellious youth, along with years of sunbathing and carefree living, had taken a toll on her body. "When I was young, I worshipped the sun," she said. "Now I realize that same light both nourished me and burned me." Despite her serious health battles, Jane has said she wouldn't want to be young again because she loves her life now, a life where she finally has the freedom to choose how her final chapter will unfold. In 1982, Jane Fonda sparked a cultural revolution. Her VHS tape, Jane Fonda's Workout, not only inspired millions of American women to step beyond the boundaries of the kitchen, but also became a symbol of empowerment and self-ownership. With over 17 million copies sold, it wasn't just an exercise program, it was a declaration of independence for an entire generation. Ironically, the woman hailed as the queen of fitness once hated exercising. As a student, Jane would invent any excuse to skip gym class. She later admitted with a half-playful, half-sheepish smile, "I was the kind of person who'd rather read a book than run a mile." Once, when friends dragged her to a cycling class, she ended up hospitalized for 5 days from exhaustion. The truth was, Jane had a rare biological advantage, a condition known as double-jointed tendons, which made her joints unusually flexible. Thanks to this trait, she could perform yoga and Pilates moves that would take others months to master. When the camera captured her in Jane Fonda's Workout, audiences saw a radiant, strong, and effortlessly graceful woman. They had no idea that much of that perfection didn't come from relentless training, but from a unique body nature had gifted her. That same physical talent also helped her shine on screen. In the 1968 sci-fi classic Barbarella, she played a seductive space traveler from the future, a role that required countless wire stunts, body bends, and complex action sequences. Jane handled them so effortlessly that her then-husband, director Roger Vadim, once said, "She moves as if gravity doesn't exist." One of the most shocking moments of Jane Fonda's life happened in 1970. At the time, she was arrested by Cleveland police on charges of drug possession accusations that were later proven false and widely believed to have been politically motivated by pressure from the Nixon White House. The next morning, as she was escorted to court with her hands cuffed, a crowd of supporters chanted her name. Suddenly, Jane raised her fist high in the air, the iconic "Power to the People" salute, a symbol of defiance and resistance in that era. Although she was fined $5,500, Jane Fonda left the courthouse as a new symbol of freedom. From then on, her name was no longer tied only to Hollywood's queen, but also to a warrior for justice. From protesting the Vietnam War to advocating for women's rights, environmental protection, and more recently, the Black Lives Matter movement, she visited impoverished neighborhoods to organize aid programs, opened her home to shelter persecuted activists, and helped raise funds for human rights organizations. At times, her actions led people to label her dangerous or even un-American, but Jane never wavered. She once said in an interview, "I used to be a sex symbol. Now, I want to be a symbol of change." Today, well into her 82nds, Jane Fonda still marches in protests, still gets arrested during climate demonstrations, and still stands proudly with silver hair, a radiant smile, and the same unshakable spirit that has defined her for more than 6 decades. One of the most defining moments in Jane Fonda's activist career was her 2-week visit to North Vietnam in 1972, where she witnessed firsthand the war she had fiercely opposed and publicly condemned America's military policies. But Fonda's activism went far beyond street protests. She turned art itself into a form of resistance. In Coming Home, 1978, she portrayed a woman grappling with the psychological aftermath of war, exposing the invisible wounds suffered by thousands of veterans. In 9 to 5, 1980, alongside Dolly Parton and Lily Tomlin, she gave voice to women fighting sexual harassment, unequal pay, and the burdens of working life. For Fonda, every role was not just art, it was an act of politics. Even her famous fitness video, Jane Fonda's workout, which sold over 17 million copies, wasn't just a commercial success. She donated all the profits to the Campaign for Economic Democracy, a movement advocating for economic equality and workers' rights. Jane Fonda has never denied her past mistakes. Instead, she's chosen to live in a way that makes amends. "When I die, I want my family around me," she said. "To be loved, I have to deserve it, and I'm trying every day." After announcing her retirement in 1991, many believed Jane Fonda would quietly step away from the spotlight. But 14 years later, she made a stunning comeback in Monster-in-Law, 2005, alongside Jennifer Lopez, a box office hit that proved her star power had never faded. In 2009, she returned to Broadway after nearly half a century with 33 variations, followed by memorable roles in The Butler, 2013, Better Living Through Chemistry, This Is Where I Leave You, 2014, and even a guest voice appearance on The Simpsons. The third act of Fonda's life truly began with Netflix's Grace and Frankie, 2015. Spanning 7 seasons, the show turned Jane and Lily Tomlin into icons of resilient aging, women who still knew how to love, laugh, live, and reclaim joy on their own terms. In 2017, she reunited with Robert Redford in Our Souls at Night, a tender love story about connection in later life. Even after Grace and Frankie wrapped in 2021, Jane didn't slow down. She appeared in Amazon Prime's Yearly Departed, radiating her trademark grace, wit, and insight. In a recent interview with People, Jane Fonda spoke with calm wisdom. "I want my life to be an example for young people. I've lived well, worked hard, and lived with purpose. At this point, I don't need to prove anything anymore." Those words felt like the perfect summation of her journey. A life defined by courage, reflection, resilience, and passion. Jane Fonda is more than a Hollywood legend. She is a symbol of awakening. A woman who transformed fame into a force for humanity and turned personal wounds into collective strength. Looking back, we don't just see a movie star, we see an entire era, one built on conviction, compassion, and a heart that has never stopped beating for the world.